He wasn't born to be famous. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, nor the most confident. In a city obsessed with charm and perfection, Steve Carell was ordinary. A quiet man with a soft voice, a nervous laugh, and eyes that always seemed to be searching for something. Truth, perhaps, or kindness. But that very ordinariness would one day redefine comedy itself. Before he was Michael Scott, the clueless boss loved by millions, Steve was a struggling actor selling his soul in tiny commercials, doubting whether Hollywood would ever notice him. He wasn't built for fame. He was built for sincerity, and that would be his secret weapon. From awkward auditions to global recognition, from laughter to heartbreak, this is the story of a man who made the world laugh. Not by pretending to be someone else, but by daring to be real, because sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths. This is the journey of Steve Carell, Hollywood's quiet genius. Long before the lights, cameras, and applause, there was a small, quiet town in Massachusetts, Concord. It was here, on August 16, 1962, that Stephen John Carell was born, the youngest of 4 boys in a hard-working middle-class family. His father, Edwin, was an electrical engineer. His mother, Harriet, a psychiatric nurse. Together they built a home where decency mattered more than success, and kindness was not a weakness, but a way of life. Steve was a shy child, often hiding behind his older brothers during family gatherings. He wasn't the class clown, not yet. Instead, he was observant, watching how people spoke, how they reacted, how a small pause or awkward silence could tell a bigger story than words ever could. That curiosity for human behavior would later become the foundation of his comedy. In school, Steve loved hockey as much as he loved history. He joined his high school band, playing the fife, a humble beginning for someone who would one day become a master of timing and tone. His teachers remembered him as polite, thoughtful, and endlessly curious, the kind of student who noticed everything but never demanded attention. At home, the Carell family gathered every night for dinner. No phones, no distractions. Just stories, laughter, the warmth of connection. In those small, ordinary moments, Steve learned something extraordinary. That humor wasn't just about being funny. It was about empathy. It was about understanding people. He once said, "My parents never told me to chase fame. They told me to be kind. The rest would follow." That lesson, planted in a modest home in Concord, would quietly guide him through every storm Hollywood would later bring. When Steve Carell left Concord for Denison University in Ohio, he had no plan to become a star. He studied history and dreamed, perhaps, of becoming a lawyer. But destiny had a different script. One day, while performing in a small campus play, Steve felt something he'd never felt before. A spark, quiet yet undeniable. It wasn't about applause. It was about connection. The laughter, the silence, the way the audience breathed with him. It all made sense. After graduation, he moved to Chicago, the heart of American comedy, and joined the Second City, the legendary improv theater that had shaped comedians like Bill Murray and Tina Fey. But Chicago wasn't kind to beginners. Steve worked part-time jobs to survive, even selling insurance. Nights were spent performing for audiences that barely filled a room. Still, he kept going. On that stage, among the quick-witted chaos of improv, Steve found his rhythm. Awkward pauses, honest reactions, and the bravery to be vulnerable. He wasn't trying to be funny. He was just human, and that made people laugh. It was at Second City that he met Stephen Colbert, a fellow dreamer who would become both a lifelong friend and creative mirror. Together, they honed the art of subtle absurdity, turning discomfort into laughter. Years passed before Hollywood finally called. His first national exposure came through The Dana Carvey Show, and later, The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, where his deadpan delivery and self-deprecating humor stood out. For the first time, America saw what Chicago had already known. Behind that nervous smile was a genius of empathy and timing. Steve Carell had taken his first real step out of anonymity and into the fragile, unpredictable light of fame. Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with Steve Carell at first. He was too sincere to play the clown, too gentle to play the villain. Casting directors labeled him the nice guy, which in Hollywood often means forgettable. But in 2004, everything changed. That year, Steve landed a supporting role in Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy. His portrayal of Brick Tamland, the dim yet lovable weatherman, stole every scene. Audiences couldn't get enough of his awkward charm, his strange innocence. For the first time, the nice guy wasn't forgettable. He was unforgettable. The following year, The 40-Year-Old Virgin hit theaters. Written and co-produced by Carell himself, it became an instant classic. The film wasn't just funny, it was human. Beneath the jokes was vulnerability, sincerity, and heart. Steve wasn't mocking loneliness. He was understanding it. That combination of humor and honesty made him a star overnight. Critics hailed him as the new face of modern comedy. But Steve didn't see himself as a star. He was still the same humble man from Massachusetts, showing up early, learning everyone's name on set, and going home to his family at night. Then came the role that would define an era, Michael Scott in The Office. At first the show struggled. Ratings were low, critics uncertain. But something happened. People began to see him. Beneath Michael's ridiculous arrogance and cringe-worthy behavior was a kind of brokenness everyone could relate to. He wasn't just the boss who made you laugh. He was the boss who made you cry. Week after week, Steve turned an office mockumentary into a mirror of human vulnerability. Through laughter, he revealed loneliness. Through foolishness, he revealed truth. By the time The Office reached its golden years, Steve Carell was no longer that guy from The Funny Show. He was a phenomenon. The quiet man from Concord had become one of Hollywood's most beloved storytellers, by daring to stay genuine in a world addicted to pretense. For most Hollywood stars, the word fall means scandal. For Steve Carell, it meant something quieter, and perhaps even more difficult: being misunderstood. By 2011, The Office had become a cultural phenomenon, and Michael Scott was one of the most beloved characters on television. So when Steve announced his departure after 7 seasons, the world was shocked. Fans begged him to stay. The studio offered more money, but Steve said no, choosing family and self-respect over fame. He left at the height of his career, walking away from the show that had made him a household name. What followed wasn't a dramatic tabloid downfall. It was the silence after applause. Hollywood didn't know what to do with him anymore. The industry that once celebrated him as a genius now saw him as the comedy guy who left too soon. Several of his next projects, light comedies, experimental dramas, underperformed at the box office. Reporters began to question whether his magic had faded. He was too funny for serious roles, too serious for comedies. It was the in-between, the gray area where artists either vanish or transform. But Steve never chased validation. While others built brands, he rebuilt himself. He disappeared from headlines, choosing instead to spend time with his wife Nancy and their children. No drama, no reinvention campaign, just silence and humility. And yet in that silence, something powerful was taking shape. A deeper artist, a man ready to explore the shadows behind the laughter. Because sometimes, the greatest risk isn't failing in front of millions. It's stepping away when the world begs you to stay. Hollywood loves comebacks, but Steve Carell's wasn't loud. It didn't begin with a blockbuster or a publicity stunt. It began with silence and a choice. In 2014, Steve took a role no one expected him to play: millionaire John DuPont in Foxcatcher. Gone was the warmth, the smile, the comedic timing. In their place, coldness, repression, and unsettling darkness. It was a chilling transformation. Viewers who once laughed at him now sat frozen, unnerved by his quiet menace. And when the credits rolled, something remarkable had happened. Steve Carell had shattered his own image. Critics called it the performance of a lifetime. He earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, a validation not just of talent, but of courage. He had done the impossible, turned vulnerability into power, but he didn't stop there. In The Big Short, He embodied righteous anger and moral frustration with Wall Street corruption. In Beautiful Boy, he became the grieving father, fragile and human, reminding audiences that pain doesn't discriminate, not even for those who make us laugh. And on Apple TV's The Morning Show, he confronted the complexities of morality, guilt, and redemption in a Me Too-era world. Each role peeled away another layer of the man we thought we knew. Through his work, Steve proved that comedy and tragedy share the same heartbeat: empathy. He wasn't reinventing himself for fame. He was evolving, as all true artists do, by listening, feeling, and daring to go deeper. The industry that once doubted him now whispered his name with respect. Steve Carell had not only risen again, he had redefined what a second act could look like. Steve Carell never chased the spotlight, yet it found him anyway. Not because of loud headlines or controversies, but because of the quiet consistency of his craft. In an industry built on ego and spectacle, Steve became a symbol of decency, proof that success and humility could coexist. His characters, from the foolishly lovable Michael Scott to the broken souls of Foxcatcher and Beautiful Boy, changed the way audiences viewed comedy and drama alike. He blurred the line between laughter and pain, reminding the world that humor isn't an escape from reality. It's a bridge to understanding it. Among younger comedians and actors, Steve is often described as the blueprint. John Krasinski, Emma Stone, Jonah Hill, and countless others have spoken about how his professionalism and kindness on set shaped their own careers. He treated everyone, from the director to the janitor, with the same level of respect. To Steve, storytelling was never about fame. It was about human connection. Even years after The Office ended, its influence only grew stronger. Memes, rewatches, podcasts. The show became part of the global pop culture fabric. And at the center of it all was Steve Carell, a man who turned awkwardness into art and sincerity into strength. His legacy isn't measured in awards or box office numbers. It lives in the millions of people who still find comfort, laughter, and hope in his work. He didn't just make the world laugh. He made it gentler. Away from the cameras, Steve Carell lives a life that feels almost out of time. No red carpets, no constant self-promotion. Just a quiet existence with his wife, Nancy Carell, and their 2 children in Massachusetts. They run a small general store together, where Steve occasionally helps out behind the counter. Customers often do a double take. Is that Steve Carell? But he smiles politely and continues stacking shelves. It's not an act. It's who he is. In interviews, Steve often says he doesn't see himself as a celebrity. He sees himself as a husband, a father, a co-worker. Fame, to him, is a temporary echo. What lasts, he believes, are the small acts of kindness, the moments no one sees. He's spoken openly about his gratitude, not for the awards, but for the chance to make people feel something. Whether it's laughter in a hard week or tears in a quiet moment, he measures success by empathy, not applause. Comedy, he once said, isn't about being funny. It's about being truthful. Steve doesn't chase the next big role. He chooses projects that move him, stories that carry meaning. And while Hollywood races ahead with trends and algorithms, Steve continues to walk his own slow, steady path. Grounded, humble, genuine. He has found what so many never do: balance. A life not ruled by fame but enriched by gratitude. A career not about power but purpose. Because for Steve Carell, the real victory was never in becoming famous. It was in staying human. In a world that celebrates noise, Steve Carell built his legacy on quiet strength. He never demanded attention, he earned it. He never chased fame, he invited empathy. And in doing so, he reminded millions that greatness doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it simply listens. From the modest home in Concord to the dazzling chaos of Hollywood, Steve's story is proof that decency still matters. That kindness, patience, and humor can outlast cynicism. That you don't need to be the loudest to be heard. You just need to be true. His journey isn't about the spotlight he stood under, but the light he carried within. Through laughter, heartbreak, and silence, he gave the world something rare: authenticity, a mirror that reflects not perfection but humanity. And perhaps that is Steve Carell's greatest performance, not on a stage or a screen, but in the way he's lived his life. With grace, with warmth, with quiet brilliance. Because when the applause fades and the lights dim, what remains isn't fame. It's the feeling he left behind. This was the story of Steve Carell, Hollywood's quiet genius.